Christians, as family, as brothers and sisters in the body of Christ, emphasizing a shared behavior toward each other, which hopefully will culminate in, I think, the grandest one another that we find in the New Testament, and that is to love one another, to love each other. In fact, of those 50-something times that this little word is used, it's attached with love more than any other. Right? So that's our goal. That's our goal. Right? So my text this evening, my one another passage, is found in James chapter 4 and verse 11. And I'm going to read it first from the Revised Standard Version, because that's the way it was given to me. And it simply says, "Do not speak evil against one another." Now, before we get to that text, let me kind of put it in a broader context for us in the epistle of James. James is often referred to as a general epistle, along with Hebrews, 1st and 2nd Peter, Jude, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, kind of separate and apart from all the letters that we have written by the Apostle Paul. James, as you well know, was the half-brother of Jesus who initially was an unbeliever. At least that's what is said about James and the other half-brothers of Jesus in the Gospels. But it's at some point, he becomes a believer. And based upon our reading of the book of Acts, becomes a very important leader among the Christians in Jerusalem, kind of that first 30 or 40 years or so of Christianity. When you look closely at what James says to his original audience, it seems that most likely he was writing to a community of Jewish Christians, because there is a heavy dependence upon the Old Testament. James will take some principles from the Old Testament and make application now for these Christians, which again suggests that maybe his original audience were primarily Jewish Christians. The theme, I would suggest, is faith. And James in chapter 2 does a marvelous job for us in defining what biblical faith is. And I know you know those texts. Faith without works is dead. It's lifeless. You know, what good does it say, does it do to say to someone, here, go on your way and may God bless, if you're not willing to actually do something about it. Right? And so faith is a verb. It's something we do. And so you might outline James' letter this way. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 18, he talks about the test of faith, which kind of serves as an introduction or a prologue to the main body of the letter. Chapter 1, verse 19 through chapter 5, verse 6, where he gives the characteristics of faith. And it's in this section, of course, that we'll find our text here in just a moment. And then the letter concludes, chapter 5, verses 7 through 20, with what we might call the triumph of faith. When we put faith into action, this is how victorious and how triumphant it can be. So my text is found in chapter 4 in verse 11. And immediately before verse 11, in chapter 4, verses 7 through 10, James throws together, so to speak, a string of imperatives, a string of commands. These are some things you need to do. And he's describing a humble walk with God. Right? And so we come to verse 11, and these commands or these imperatives continue. Again, all linked back to this idea of humbly walking with our Creator. We find our text tonight. And it simply says, do not speak evil against one another. He forbids a type of speech or a type of talk which disrupts harmony in the community, disrupts unity amongst Christians. And as we're going to see here in just a minute, because you can't read verse 11 with not reading verse 12. There is a certain behavior then linked to this evil talk. In fact, might even be the result of this behavior in verse 12. So we're going to link these two verses together. But here's what he says. Brethren, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Okay, this word that the RSV translates as to speak evil against, and I just read from the NIV, which the NIV translates as slander. It literally means simply just to speak against. And it can describe any number of damaging talk or speech that we might extend to other people. It can move from speaking carelessly, such as gossip, or carelessly joking with someone, making someone